Chapter 12 of the Grell Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine Blashford. The Grell Mystery by Frank Froust. Chapter 12. Heldon Foyle walked thoughtfully back to Scotland Yard, satisfied that the shadowing of Ivan Abramovich was in competent hands. With the strong man's confidence in himself, he had no fears as to his decision to release the man. He was beginning to have a shadowy idea of the relation of pieces in his jigsaw puzzle. Ivan, he knew, ought to have been arrested if only for failing to give a satisfactory account of his possession of the pearl necklace. But the superintendent had, as he mentally phrased it, tied a string to him, and it would not be his fault if nothing resulted. It was well after midnight before he had finished his work at Scotland Yard. He had had a long interview with the Garden of Eden, in which promises were adroitly mingled with threats. In the result, the bunco steerer had promised to keep his eyes and ears alert for news of anyone resembling Goldenberg. There was a string of other callers who had been discreetly sorted out by the superintendent's diplomatic lieutenants. Finally, he pulled out the book which dealt with the case, and with the aid of a typist added several more chapters. With a sigh of relief, he at last sauntered out into the cool, fresh midnight air. 9 o'clock next morning saw him again in his office. Sir Hilary Thornton was his first caller. Foyle put aside his reports at his chief's opening question. "Yes, we've taken every human precaution to preserve secrecy," he replied. "Everyone who knows that it is not Grell's body in the house has been pledged to hold his tongue. I have managed to get the inquest put back for 3 days, so that there will be no evidence of identification till then. That gives us a chance. And I've made out a confidential report to be sent to the Foreign Office, so that Grell's government shan't get restive. Here are the latest reports, sir." The Assistant Commissioner bent over the sheaf of typewritten documents for a little, in complete absorption. As he came to the last sheet, he gave a start of surprise. "So you let this man Ivan go? Do you think that wise?" "I'm fishing," answered Foyle enigmatically. "I couldn't have better bait than Ivan. There are 3 men sticking to him like limpets now, and a couple are keeping an eye on Sir Ralph Fairfield. I think that will be all right. Do you remember the Myton Grange case? We knew there had been a murder, but couldn't do anything till we found the body. Dutful, the murderer, would have slid off to some place where there's no extradition, but for the fact that I had him arrested on a charge of being in the unlawful possession of a pickaxe handle. This affair is the converse of that. We can't afford to have Ivan under lock and key." Sir Hilary Thornton bit his lip and looked steadfastly at the scarlet geranium on the window-sill, as though in search of enlightenment. "I believe I see," he exclaimed after a pause. "Ivan must have been something more than a valet. He's a superior type of man, and the conclusion to be drawn if he knows that Grell is alive—" "Precisely," interrupted the superintendent. "Any result for the offer of a reward for Goldenberg?" A flicker of amusement dwelt in Heldon Foyle's blue eyes. "Yes, he has been seen by different people within an hour or 2 of each other in Glasgow, Southampton, Gloucester, Cherbourg, Plymouth and Cardiff. Our information on that point is not precisely helpful. Of course, we've got the local police making inquiries in each case, but I don't anticipate they will find out much. Still, it will keep 'em amused." The necessity of a conference broke up further conversation. Gathered in the building were some 30 or 40 departmental chiefs of the C.I.D., the picked men of their profession. Most of them were divisional detective inspectors who were in charge of districts, and some few were men who had special duties. They were ranged about tables in a lofty room, its green distempered walls hung with stiff photographs of living and retired officials. Men of all types were there, from the spruce, smartly groomed detectives of the West End to the burly, ill-dressed detectives of the East. Between them they spoke every known language. Here was Penny, who had specialised in forgeries; Brown, who knew every trick of coiners; Mulby, the terror of racecourse sharps; Menzies, who had as keen a scent for the gambling hell as a hound for a fox; Poole, who was intimate with the ways of railway thieves and shoplifters. Not one but thoroughly understood his profession and knew where to look for his information. Foyle took the chair, and the buzz of conversation became general. It was a business conference of experts. Views were exchanged on concrete problems, the movements of well-known criminals discussed. Velvet-fingered Ned had disappeared from Islington and reappeared in Brixton. Tony Smith was due out of prison. Mike O'Brien had patched up the peace with Yid Foster, and when they got together— So the talk went on, and so every district learned what was taking place in other districts. The superintendent sat silent for a while listening. At last his smooth voice broke in. "The man Ivan, whose description was circulated, is not to be touched now. Tell your men to let him alone if they come across him." There was a deep chorus. "Very good, sir." And Foyle, with a nod of dismissal, left the room. He stopped to make an inquiry in the clerk's office, and passing along the corridor unlocked a door and pressed a bell. In under half an hour a big labourer, with corduroys tied about the knees, lurched unsteadily out of the Lost Property Office and passed into Whitehall. Rough tousled hair, an unkempt moustache, and a day's growth of beard on the chin were details warranted to stand inspection. Heldon Foyle rarely used a disguise, but when he did he was careful that nothing should get out of order. Hair and moustache were his own, dyed and brushed cunningly. Yet when he reeled against Green near the Albany, the inspector, who was an observant man, pushed him roughly aside with an anathema on his clumsiness. "Didn't you did it?" stormed the labourer aggressively. "Course I look where I'm going." Then in a lower tone, "I'm Foyle. I got your telephone message. Anything moving now?" "If you don't go away I shall call a constable." Green had been quick to see his cue and spoke loudly. He went on rapidly. "He hasn't stirred out. A post office messenger has just gone in with a letter for him. I said I was expecting one and got a glimpse at it." "All right, old pal, don't get excited. You go home and tell the missus all about it," retorted the labourer. Green walked rapidly away, spoke a few words to a man who was standing on the other side of the road, deeply interested in a bookseller's window, and departed. The superintendent felt in his pockets and produced a couple of boxes of matches. A constable strolled up, dignified and stern. A swift word in an undertone sent him away with burning cheeks. In half an hour Foyle had sold a box of matches, for which he received sixpence with profuse thanks and inward disgust. If he sold his second box and still hung about, his loitering without excuse might attract undesirable attention. The contingency, however, did not arise, for a minute or two later Fairfield himself strolled into the street. Foyle rushed to open the door of a taxicab, which he hailed, but another tout was before him. Nevertheless, he heard the address. "Grave Street, Whitechapel," he murmured to himself as the cab slipped away. "Ivan has got to work." A short argument with a second cab driver, who distrusted his appearance, was cut short by a deposit of 5 shillings as a guarantee of good faith, and the superintendent also began the journey. Behind him a third cab carried the man who had been so deeply interested in the bookseller's window. End of chapter 12.